Hey guys, tonight we are not just traveling back in time, we're stepping into a world so meticulously organized, so beautifully intricate, that it makes modern bureaucracy look like a child's scribbled drawing. We're heading to 7th-century China, to the heart of the Tang Dynasty, a period often called a golden age. But don't expect wild adventures and daring escapes. Tonight, we're going to explore something far more subtle, far more pervasive, and frankly, a little bit silly in its meticulousness, the official rules for mourning. Trust me, if you think saying the wrong thing at a funeral is awkward now, you probably wouldn't survive the first day of mourning in Tang, China. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop a comment below with your city and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and the world is a kaleidoscope of imperial grandeur. The air hums with the distant murmur of voices, the rattle of carriage wheels on stone, and the delicate tinkle of jade wind chimes. You find yourself in Cheng'an, the capital city of the Tang Dynasty, and it is vast, orderly, and breathtakingly impressive. Wide, tree-lined avenues stretch out in a perfect grid, leading to massive, ornate gates. Pavilions with sweeping, tiled roofs gleam in the sunlight. This is no messy, organic European city. This is a meticulously planned metropolis, a testament to imperial power and philosophical ideals of order. You walk down one of these grand avenues, a thoroughfare wide enough for several chariots to ride abreast. You see merchants from Persia, monks from India, and scholars from Korea, all mingling with the local Chinese citizens. The Tang Dynasty was truly a cosmopolitan empire, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and goods, connected by the Silk Road and vast maritime trade routes. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of the day. The Tang Dynasty was arguably the most powerful, prosperous, and culturally vibrant empire in the world at the time. Its capital, Shanghai, with an estimated population of over 1 million people, was a global hub, a center of art, literature, technology, and governance. And the governance here is absolute. Every aspect of life, from the smallest village dispute to the grandest imperial ceremony, is governed by a complex and comprehensive legal code. This is the Tang Code, one of the most sophisticated and enduring legal systems in pre-modern China. It's not just a collection of laws, it's a moral blueprint for society. It covers everything from criminal offenses to land ownership, from taxation to, yes, even how you are supposed to mourn a deceased relative. You notice a peculiar detail in the way people interact. There's a subtle deference, a careful politeness. Everyone seems to know their place. And, more importantly, everyone seems to know everyone else's place. This is where we get to our quirky little fact. The Tang Code wasn't just about punishment. It laid out incredibly detailed rules for social relationships, especially within families. It defined 5 degrees of kinship, called the 5 grades of mourning attire Wufu, which would determine not just what you wore, but how long you mourned, what you could eat, and even how severely you could be punished if you committed a crime against a relative. It was a societal GPS for grief. Your exact relationship to the deceased dictated your entire mourning performance. Imagine having a government-mandated spreadsheet for your sorrow. This brings us to a fascinating question that historians still debate: how much of the Tang Code, especially these highly ritualized aspects, was actual daily practice versus an idealized vision of society. Did everyone really follow these intricate mourning rules to the letter? Or were they more of a formal ideal, with some flexibility in practice? Some historians argue for a high degree of adherence. They point to the strong emphasis on Confucian values like filial piety and social harmony, which would have compelled people to follow the rules, lest they be seen as impious or disruptive. The social pressure alone would have been immense. To deviate from the prescribed mourning rituals would be to risk public shame, loss of reputation, and even official punishment. However, other historians suggest that while the elite likely followed the rules meticulously, for the vast majority of common people who had to work to survive, such strict adherence might have been impossible. A poor farmer couldn't simply abandon his fields for 3 years to mourn his father. There would have been practical compromises, local variations, and perhaps even official exemptions for those whose livelihoods depended on continuous labor. The debate revolves around the gap between the written law and the lived reality, a common challenge in understanding any historical period. As you stand on that grand avenue, surrounded by the vibrant, orderly life of Tang China, you realize that, in this society, death is not a purely private affair. It is a public performance, a ritualized affirmation of social bonds, and a test of your adherence to the imperial order. The ground you walk on, the air you breathe, the very structure of society, all of it is built on rules. And these rules, however quiet and seemingly mundane, are about to become very personal. Your life in Tang China, it seems, is about to encounter its first official period of mourning, and the rulebook for grief is long, detailed, and utterly non-negotiable. The emperor's guiding hand, reaching into every corner of life, is merely the most visible manifestation of a deeper, more profound principle that underpinned all of Tang society. This principle is Xiaodao, or filial piety. It's not just a nice idea. It's the bedrock of their entire social, moral, and legal universe. You watch a young man, a scholar, helping his elderly father walk slowly through a garden. His posture is respectful, his movements gentle. His face shows not just affection, but a deep sense of duty. This isn't just a son caring for a parent. It's a fundamental act of citizenship in Tang China. This is the central, mainstream historical fact. Filial piety was the supreme virtue in Tang Dynasty China, deeply rooted in Confucian philosophy. It dictated a profound and lifelong respect, obedience, and care for one's parents, elders, and ancestors. It went far beyond mere affection. It was a cosmic obligation, a fundamental duty that shaped every individual's behavior from birth to death, and even beyond. The family unit was considered the miniature version of the state, and if an individual couldn't be a good child, they certainly couldn't be a good subject, official, or leader. Harmony within the family was seen as the prerequisite for harmony within the empire. Filial piety manifested in countless ways, often far beyond what a modern mind might consider reasonable. It meant absolute obedience to parental authority, even if you disagreed with their decisions. It involved caring for parents in their old age, often foregoing your own ambitions or marriage plans. It meant mourning them meticulously after their death, as we're about to explore, and performing elaborate ancestral rites to honor their memory and ensure their well-being in the afterlife. Your personal desires were almost always secondary to the needs and wishes of your parents. Here's a wonderfully specific and almost unbelievable detail that highlights the extreme lengths some went to, while not universally common. Historical, text record instances of individuals engaging in severe self-harm as a demonstration of extreme filial piety. For example, stories exist of children amputating fingers, or even parts of their own flesh, to be boiled into a medicinal broth for a dying parent, believing this extreme sacrifice would cure them or prolong their life. These acts, known as jigu cutting flesh, were often lauded as the ultimate demonstration of devotion, even if doctors or more pragmatic officials viewed them with skepticism. Imagine the social pressure that could lead someone to such an act. The Tang Code, which was the legal backbone of the empire, explicitly legislated filial piety. It was just a moral guideline. It was the law. The code meticulously differentiated punishments for crimes based on the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. Striking a parent, verbally abusing them, or even insulting them was considered unfilial and met with the harshest penalties, far more severe than the same offense against a stranger. For instance, striking a stranger might earn you a beating, but striking a parent could be a capital crime, punishable by death. Not providing proper care for elderly parents was also a punishable offense. This legal framework shows how deeply embedded filial piety was in the state's ideology. It literally structured their understanding of crime and justice. This leads to an ongoing debate among historians. How genuine was this filial piety in practice? Was it truly heartfelt respect and love, an emotional core of family life? Or was it largely a performative act driven by social pressure and fear of legal consequences? One argument is that it was deeply internalized, a genuine spiritual and emotional bond passed down through generations. People genuinely believed in it, felt profound affection, and embraced their duties. The rituals were expressions of sincere love and grief. However, another perspective suggests that while the ideal was strong, the strict rules and harsh punishments meant that a significant portion of filial behavior was performative. Individuals had to act filial to maintain their social standing, to progress in official careers as good officials were by definition filial, or simply to avoid severe penalties. The line between genuine emotion and ritual performance was often blurry, and it was certainly possible to outwardly conform without deep inner devotion. The system demanded the appearance of filial piety, and many were experts at providing it. As you observe the quiet reverence of the people, you realize that, in Tang China, the death of a parent or an elder is not just a personal loss. It is a moment of profound public and private reckoning, a time when the very foundation of society is tested. It demands a ritualized response, a carefully choreographed display of grief that affirms the deceased's place in the family's place in society, and your own place within that intricate web of duties. And soon, you will receive news that forces you to engage directly with this powerful, all-minus, encompassing virtue. Your moment to perform filial piety is about to begin. The grand sweep of Chang'an, the pervasive influence of the emperor, and the omnipresent ideal of filial piety. You've seen how these forces quietly shape every aspect of life in Tang China. You've settled into a rhythm, perhaps even found a small place within this meticulously ordered society. You've learned the subtleties of bowing, the importance of correct greetings, and the unspoken rules of deference. You might even feel, for a fleeting moment, a sense of belonging. Then, the world stops. It happens not with a crash, but with a quiet, urgent messenger at your door. The air around you, which just moments ago felt calm and predictable, suddenly crackles with an unbearable tension. The messenger's face is grave, his voice harsh, as he delivers the news. A senior family member, perhaps your father, a respected uncle, or a beloved grandparent has passed away. The exact words are delivered with formal brevity, but their impact is immediate and absolute. Your personal world, whatever mundane tasks you are engaged in, instantly dissolves. You might have been reading a scroll, sipping tea, or simply watching the sunlight stream through a paper window. None of that matters anymore. The news of a death, especially of an elder in your direct lineage, is not a private sorrow to be quietly processed. It is an immediate, public, and legally mandated rupture. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this moment of death in the family, particularly the death of a parent or grandparent, triggered immediate and total transformation of your daily life, governed by the detailed prescriptions of the Tang Code. It was the choice. It was an obligation, enforced by law and overwhelming social pressure. The moment you hear the news, a cascade of ritualistic actions is triggered. You don't have time to process your grief in a modern sense. Instead, your grief is immediately channeled into a prescribed set of behaviors. The first and most urgent step is to express audible lamentation. You are expected to wail, to cry out your sorrow loudly and demonstratively. This isn't just an emotional outburst. It's a performance, a signal to your household and your neighbors that the proper mourning has begun. The louder and more unrestrained your cries, the more profound your sorrow, and the more filial you appear. Imagine having to perform your deepest grief on demand, right there and then. It's certainly a unique form of therapy. Within moments, the house transforms. Furnishings might be covered with plain cloth or removed entirely. Luxurious items are put away. The vibrant colors of daily life are replaced by somber tones. The preparation of the body, the notification of other family members, the setting up of a mourning hall, all of these complex tasks begin immediately. following generations of detailed ritual. And this is where we get to our wonderfully specific and slightly strange detail, the importance of the initial public wailing. There were specific historical accounts of mourners, particularly professional mourners who might be hired for funerals, being judged on the authenticity and volume of their cries. A common criticism was that their wailing sounded too forced or too perfunctory, lacking genuine sorrow. But conversely, if your personal wailing wasn't loud enough or seemed insufficient, it could be seen as a lack of filial piety, potentially leading to social censure or even legal repercussions. So you're not just grieving, you're audited for your grief. This brings us to a fascinating ongoing debate among historians what was the true nature of emotion in Tang China, particularly during mourning. Were these elaborate, ritualized expressions of grief genuinely felt, or were they primarily social performances designed to conform to Confucian ideals and legal requirements? One perspective argues that the rituals shaped the emotion by compelling people to wail, to wear coarse clothing, and to live austerely. The rituals actively produced and intensified grief, channeling it into socially acceptable and meaningful forms. The performance is the emotion, or at least a crucial part of it. This view suggests that Tang people were not necessarily suppressing their true feelings, but expressing them through a culturally specific, ritualized vocabulary. However, another perspective suggests that while genuine grief certainly existed, the extreme formality and legal enforcement of these rituals could also lead to a performative aspect that was detached from true inner feeling. People might have felt immense pressure to conform, to act grieving, even if their inner emotional state was more complex or subdued. The debate centers on the complex interplay between societal expectations, legal coercion, and genuine human emotion, a question that is difficult to answer for any historical period, let alone one so far removed from our own. As the wails of lamentation begin to fill your ears, and you find yourself swept into the immediate, overwhelming current of ritual, you realize that your quiet life in Tang China has irrevocably changed. Your status, your daily activities, your very appearance all are about to be transformed. The social order, so meticulously maintained by the emperor's guiding hand and the pervasive ideals of filial piety, is now reaching directly into your personal sorrow. You are not just mourning a loved one, you are performing your duty to an empire. And the first, most visible sign of this transformation is about to be placed upon your shoulders, the coarse, uncomfortable garments of grief. The vibrant silks and soft cottons of your previous life are gone. In their place, a bundle of coarse, undyed fabric lies before you. It's a stark, almost brutal contrast to the layers of luxurious cloth you've become accustomed to in Tang China. You pick up the top garment. It feels stiff, unyielding, and scratchy against your fingers. The color is a dull, natural beige minus gray, the raw hue of unbleached hemp. There is no embroidery, no intricate patterns, no flattering cut. It is just fabric. This is your new wardrobe. This is the Zan Siyu I Jansui or Siyu, I Yi Qi Shui, the prescribed mourning attire, crafted from the roughest, undye hemp. And this is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. Wearing the correct mourning garb was not merely a custom or a personal choice in Tang Dynasty China. It was a strictly enforced legal requirement, meticulously detailed within the Tang Code. Your clothes became a public, unmistakable declaration of your grief, your social status in relation to the deceased, and your temporary withdrawal from the normal rhythms of society. It was a visible uniform of sorrow, a physical manifestation of your adherence to filial piety. You carefully don the first layer. It feels abrasive against your skin, particularly your arms and neck. It's designed to be uncomfortable, a constant, physical reminder of the sorrow you are meant to feel on display. You imagine the rough fibers chafing, the stiff material restricting your movements. Forget about soft linens or flowing silks. This is literally sackcloth. Your daily comfort is sacrificed at the altar of ritualized grief. The specific type of fabric and its degree of coarsened were meticulously defined and directly corresponded to the 5 grades of mourning attire Wufu, which we'll delve deeper into next. For the most profound grief, such as mourning a father or mother. You would wear the roughest, unhemmed hemp, its raw edges signifying the raw, untamed nature of your sorrow. For lesser degrees of kinship, the fabric might be slightly less coarse, and the hems would be sewn, indicating a more controlled or less extreme form of grief. Even the stitches or lack thereof on your clothes were loaded with meaning. Imagine trying to get ready in the morning, knowing that every seam or lack thereof on your clothes conveyed a precise legal and social message. Beyond the basic fabric, the mourning attire often included other specific elements. For the heaviest grades of mourning, men might wear a rough, pointed cap known as Sang-fu or Zhao-fu to symbolize deep pain, almost like a crown of thorns. Women's hair was left unbound or tied back with simple, unadorned kohl, a stark contrast to the elaborate coiffures of daily life. Shoes would be simple straw sandals or plain cloth slippers, reinforcing the asceticism and rejection of worldly comforts. Every detail, down to the fasteners of your clothing, was prescribed. Forget about fashion statements. This was a statement of duty. Here's a wonderfully specific and somewhat peculiar detail. The Tang Code even addressed cases where a family might try to cheat the mourning dress code. For example, wearing a mourning garment that was to fine eye, not rough enough for your prescribed grade of mourning, or wearing it for too short a period, could result in a legal penalty, often a beating with light or heavy bamboo. Conversely, wearing mourning attire for a lower degree of kinship than required, thereby showing insufficient filial piety, would result in an even harsher punishment. The Tang authorities were not messing around with your grief minus wear. They expected precise adherence to the dress code of sorrow. Imagine a fashion police, but for sadness. This precise regulation of mourning attire leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Was this meticulous dress code primarily a practical tool for social identification and enforcement, or did it play a deeper psychological role in shaping the experience of grief for individuals? One perspective argues that the clothing served a vital public function. It instantly signaled to everyone your social status as a mourner, and the specific nature of your grief, who you were mourning and how intense. This allowed society to interact with you appropriately, to offer condolences, to know not to engage you in festive activities, and to understand your temporary removal from certain social obligations. The discomfort of the clothing, in this view, was less about inducing grief and more about creating a clear, visible boundary between the mourner and the rest of society, making the rules of interaction clear for everyone. It was a highly efficient social signaling system. However, another perspective suggests that the very discomfort and aesthetic rejection embedded in the mourning attire were intended to be a form of physical penance that would actively foster and deepen genuine grief by forcing the individual into such stark, uncomfortable clothing. The ritual aimed to keep the mourner in a constant state of discomfort and detachment from worldly pleasures, thereby ensuring their mind remained focused on their sorrow and filial duty. The rough fabric was meant to scrape not just the skin, but the soul, reminding you continuously of your loss and your obligation to it. The debate here centers on whether these rituals were a purely external performance, or if they also had a genuine internal, psychological impact, designed to sculpt the very emotions of the mourner. As you stand, clad in the rough, scratchy hemp, you feel the physical weight of your new status. It's a constant, irritating presence, a physical manifestation of the immense social and legal pressure to conform. Your very body has become a billboard for your grief, dictated by the intricate laws of the Tang Emperor and the all-minus encompassing demands of filial piety. The simple act of getting dressed has transformed into a profound statement of your place in this complex, ritualized world. And this is just the beginning. The precise nature of your uniform, and the length of time you must wear it, depends entirely on who you are mourning. The scratchy hemp of your new mourning clothes still chafes against your skin, a constant, physical discomfort. But the exact degree of that discomfort, the specific weave of the fabric, and the duration of your abstinence from normal life are not left to chance. They are dictated by an ancient, meticulously detailed system that now defines your very existence. You are about to discover your precise place within the hierarchy of grief. You were handed a small, worn scroll. On it, in elegant brushstrokes, are diagrams and descriptions. This is your guide to the 5 grades of mourning attire, Wufu. And this is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. The Wufu system was the cornerstone of Tang Dynasty mourning rituals, a comprehensive framework that codified every aspect of grief based on your familial relationship to the deceased. It was a societal blueprint for sorrow, determining not only your attire, but also the length of your mourning period, your diet, your actions, and even your legal obligations. It was an astonishingly precise, bureaucratic approach to personal tragedy. The Wufu system categorized all relatives into 5 concentric circles of decreasing closeness, each with its own prescribed set of rituals, from the deepest, most severe mourning for a parent to the lightest for a distant cousin. Every relationship had its defined ritual response. Let's break down these 5 grades, because they are wonderfully, almost comically, specific. Tan Siyu Hai Jan Cui. This is the roughest, most severe grade. It literally means cut coarse sackcloth, referring to garments made of unhemmed, unfinished hemp fabric, symbolizing raw, untamed grief. This was worn for the death of a parent. The mourning period was typically 3 years, 27 months in practice. During this time, you would live in a simple hut, often by the grave. If possible, abstain from meat, wine, fine clothes, and all entertainment. You would not bathe or cut your hair. This was the ultimate expression of filial piety, a complete withdrawal from normal society. Imagine a 3-year camping trip to mourn your death. Tuicu shrine, meaning even coarse hemp. This was slightly less severe. The hemp fabric was still coarse and undyed, but the edges were hemmed, signifying a more controlled grief, less raw than Cui. This was worn for grandparents, siblings, or other direct lineal ancestors. The mourning period varied from 1 year to 5 months, depending on the specific relationship. The restrictions were similar to Zensiu, but slightly less stringent in terms of living conditions. Dogon Dagon is translated to great work, referring to the effort of preparing the cloth. The fabric was a finer grade of hemp, slightly bleached, but still uncolored. This was for more distant relatives, like paternal uncles and aunts, or first cousins. The mourning period was usually 9 months. You'd still avoid luxuries and entertainment, but the physical hardship was lessened. Xiaogung, meaning lesser work. This was an even finer hemp fabric, often closer to cotton. This was for second cousins, or a married daughter mourning her mother's siblings. The mourning period was 5 months. The rules were even more relaxed, allowing for slightly better food and perhaps less stringent restrictions on bathing, but still requiring abstention from festivities and bright colors. It's like going from camping to glamping for your grief, but still definitely not a spa vacation. Same as Sima, this was the lightest grade, meaning fine hemp floss. The fabric was the finest, whitest hemp, almost like linen. This was reserved for your most distant relatives, like third cousins, great minus grandparents, or certainly minus love. The mourning period was typically 3 months, or even just 1 month for the most remote connections. The restrictions were minimal, largely confined to wearing the white clothes and abstaining from major celebrations. This was the mourning equivalent of a polite nod. The system was incredibly complex, with hundreds of specific sub-minus categories and exceptions. For instance, the mourning period for a daughter was different if she was married or unmarried. If you were adopted, your mourning obligations for your adoptive parents might outweigh those for your birth parents. It was a bureaucratic nightmare of grief. Here's a wonderfully specific and slightly absurd detail that highlights this complexity. The Tang Code contained explicit rules for what to do if multiple family members died in quick succession, creating overlapping mourning obligations. You couldn't just combine your grief. You had to observe the highest grade of mourning for the most senior relative first, and then, if a lower minus grade mourning period for another relative was still active, you had to perform it afterward. It was like having multiple academic deadlines, but for sadness. Imagine finishing your 3 years of intense mourning for your father, only to then discover you still had 5 months left for your great minus, and because her mourning period was nested under your father's, your life would be a perpetual state of structured sorrow. This brings us to a historical debate: how rigidly was this Wufu system enforced, especially among the common people? The ideal of the Tang Code implies absolute adherence, a society where everyone precisely followed these rules. However, scholars often ponder the practical realities. Could a poor family truly afford to buy fine hemp for a distant relative if they were struggling to feed themselves? Could a farmer genuinely observe a multi-year mourning period if it meant abandoning his fields and facing starvation? Some historians argue that while the formal rules were there, local customs and the realities of daily life likely led to flexibility, especially for the lower classes. Perhaps a token period of mourning, or simpler versions of the attire, were accepted. Others argue that the social pressure was so immense, and the legal consequences for unfilial behavior so severe, that most people, particularly those with any social standing to lose, would have gone to extraordinary lengths to conform, even if it meant significant hardship. The debate revolves around the gap between the codified ideal and the messy reality of human lives. As you ponder the intricacies of the Wufu system, the weight of your coarse hemp attire feels even heavier. You understand now that your clothing is not just fabric. It is a meticulously calibrated signal, a decoration of your precise position within the vast, intricate web of Chinese kinship. Your grief is not just an emotion. It is a performative duty, a legal obligation, and a public statement that tells everyone exactly who you are, who you have lost, and how long you will grieve. And this ritualized transformation is just the beginning of your long journey through the strict, quiet rules of mourning in Tang Dynasty China. The bland taste of gruel, the scratchy feel of hemp, the quiet solitude of your mourning hut, these are the immediate, personal consequences of your family's grief. But the Wufu system, in its meticulous detail, demands more than just a change of clothes. For the most profound grades of mourning, particularly and see why the 3-year period for a parent, your very living conditions and daily sustenance are utterly transformed. Your comfortable home, with its familiar luxuries, is now largely forbidden to you. You are led from the main house to a small, humble structure built nearby, perhaps in the corner of the family compound, or even within sight of the ancestral graves, if the family owned land outside the city. This is your mourning hut, Washu. It's a deliberately simple, unadorned dwelling, often little more than a shack constructed from rough timber and thatch. There are no fancy tiles on the roof, no painted walls, no intricate carvings. Inside, the furnishings are equally sparse: a simple straw mat for sleeping, a low table, perhaps a few basic implements. There is no bed, no soft cushions, no comforting luxuries. The purpose is deliberate discomfort, a physical manifestation of your sorrow and detachment from the world. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter during the most severe mourning periods, particularly for parents. Mourners were legally and socially expected to live in austere, temporary huts, often by the grave, and adhere to an extremely strict, ascetic diet. This practice was considered the ultimate embodiment of filial piety, a complete withdrawal from worldly concerns to focus solely on grieving and honoring the deceased. Your days in the mourning hut unfold in a monotonous rhythm of quiet contemplation and ritualistic chores. You are expected to meditate on your loss, to perform daily rites for the deceased, and to generally present a picture of utter sorrow. Visitors would come, but their visits would be solemn, filled with ritualized expressions of sympathy. There would be no casual conversation, no entertainment, no distractions. The hut is a solitary confinement for the soul. And then there's the food, or rather, the lack of it. Your diet is stripped down to the absolute bare essentials. Your meals will now consist of plain, unseasoned gruel thin porridge made from rice or millet and simple, unprocessed vegetables. No meat, no fish, no eggs, no dairy, no wine, no tea unless it was explicitly prescribed for medicinal purposes. and certainly no flavorful spices or elaborate preparations. The food is meant to sustain life, not to provide pleasure. It's a diet designed to be as bland and unsatisfying as possible, a constant, physical reminder of the emptiness left by your loss. You are not permitted to bathe. Your hair, as we discussed, is left uncut, unkempt. Your body is to reflect the dishevelment of your soul. This physical negligence was a public sign that you were so consumed by grief that you had abandoned all care for your personal appearance or comfort. It was a visible manifestation of your detachment from the world, a signal that you were temporarily dead to society. Here's a wonderfully specific and slightly strange detail that highlights the legal rigidity of this. The Tang Code specified precise punishments for individuals who failed to adhere to these living on dietary restrictions. For instance, if you were found to have eaten meat or drunk when during the prescribed mourning period, you could be subjected to a severe beating with heavy bamboo. The severity of the punishment depended on the grade of mourning and how long into the period the transgression occurred. It was not enough to just feel grief. You had to perform it correctly, down to the last grain of rice and the last unshaved stubble. Imagine the constant internal battle between hunger pangs and fear of legal repercussions. This rigorous observance of the mourning hut and ascetic diet leads to an ongoing debate among historians how universal and strictly enforced were these practices for all social classes. The detailed legal texts suggest a uniform expectation, but the practicalities of a vast empire are always more complex. One perspective argues that for the elite, especially aspiring officials, such strict adherence was a given. It was a crucial demonstration of their filial piety, their moral character, and their fitness for public service. To deviate would be to risk their reputation, their career, and their family's honor. They often had the means servants, land to make such extended periods of asceticism feasible. For them, the mourning hut was indeed a lived reality, a difficult but necessary performance. However, another perspective argues that for the vast majority of common people, particularly farmers and laborers whose survival depended on continuous work, such extended periods of complete withdrawal and dietary restriction would have been economically impossible. It's likely that while they might perform initial rituals and adopt simplified mourning attire, actual long-term residence in a hut or absolute dietary restrictions were either symbolically observed for shorter periods, or exceptions were made out of practical necessity. The debate centers on the tension between Confucian ideals, legal prescriptions, and the grinding realities of daily life for ordinary people. Was the mourning hut a widespread reality, or primarily an ideal for the privileged? As you sit in your simple mourning hut, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of normal life continuing without you, you feel the profound weight of this ancient system. The bland gruel in your bowl tastes like dust. The rough mat offers little comfort. This isn't just about grieving a loved one. It's about publicly severing ties with the world, proving your devotion, and submitting to an ancient order. You are a living testament to filial piety, a silent, unwashed, and very hungry embodiment of sorrow, and is profound. Deliberate isolation is just one more layer in the meticulously detailed, quiet rules of mourning in Tang Dynasty China. The pervasive silence of the mourning period, the absence of laughter and music, the very pause of the bustling streets, these are reflections of a more profound halt at the very pinnacle of society. For those who serve the emperor, the demands of grief reached into the core of their professional lives, forcing a mandatory and extended withdrawal from power. You shift your thoughts from the general stillness of the city to the sudden, stark reality faced by a high-ranking official. Imagine a man who has dedicated his entire life to climbing the bureaucratic ladder, years of arduous study, grueling imperial examinations, decades of diligent service, all leading to a position of immense influence and prestige in China. He is at the height of his power, making crucial decisions, attending imperial audiences, perhaps even shaping the destiny of the empire. Then, the news of his parents' death arrives. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. Upon the death of a parent, or sometimes a grandparent, a Tang Dynasty official was legally and immediately required to resign from their post and return to their ancestral home to observe a strict mourning period of 3 years in practice, 20-7 months. This was known as Ting Yu, meaning facing sorrow or grieving for parents. It was an unassailable rule, an absolute manifestation of filial piety, which dictated that one's duty to their deceased parents superseded all other obligations, including service to the state. Your personal grief, in this case, abruptly cancelled your career. The application of Ding Yu was immediate and non-negotiable. There was no transition period, no handover. The official simply ceased to be an official. Their seals of office were surrendered, their robes of rank replaced by coarse mourning attire, and their daily life shifted from the intricate complexities of governance to the ascetic solitude of the mourning hut. Imagine being a CEO today, and suddenly, without warning, being legally compelled to leave your office, your projects, and your team for over 2 years, all to live in a rural shack with no internet. It's a career break with very particular strings attached. The impact of this practice on the imperial bureaucracy could be immense. Key positions, vital for the functioning of the empire, could be left vacant for years. Projects might stall, policies could go unimplemented, and administrative continuity could be severely disrupted. For a vast and complex empire like the Tang, such a mandatory hiatus for experienced personnel was a constant challenge, forcing the government to have a deep bench of qualified individuals and a robust system for rapid succession. The efficiency of the Tang bureaucracy was, surprisingly, built around its ability to absorb these periodic, ritualistic shocks. Here's a wonderfully specific and politically charged detail. While Ding Yu was mandatory, there was a rare imperial dispensation known as Duo King Duoqing, literally to seize filial sentiment or to withdraw from mourning. This was an imperial command, issued by the emperor himself, compelling an official to cut short or entirely forego their mourning period and return to service, usually in times of extreme national emergency like war or major rebellion. However, accepting a Duo King order was a double-edged sword. While it was an honor and a testament to your indispensable talent in the emperor's eyes, it could also be seen by conservative Confucian and the wider public as a grave violation of filial piety. An official who accepted Duo King might gain political favor but lose immense social standing, forever branded as one who put worldly ambition above sacred duty. It was a moral tightrope walk, often causing immense personal agony for the official caught between imperial command and societal expectation. This practice of Ding Yu, on its occasional, controversial exceptions, leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Was this system ultimately a strength or a weakness of the Tang political structure? One perspective argues that Ding Yu was a profound strength, contributing to the long-term stability and ethical integrity of the Tang state. By forcing officials to regularly reconnect with their families and ancestral roots, it reinforced the core Confucian values of loyalty, humility, and moral rectitude. It prevented officials from becoming too detached, too corrupt, or too powerful by periodically removing them from the political arena, breaking up long-term power bases. It served as a vital moral check on imperial power, ensuring that even the most ambitious official had a fundamental duty that transcended the state. However, another perspective views Ding Yu as a significant weakness, a ritualistic inflexibility that could severely hamper effective governance. It led to a loss of experienced and talented officials at critical moments, disrupting continuity and potentially creating administrative crises. It could be exploited for political maneuvering, as rivals might secretly hope for a colleague's parent to die, thus removing them from contention. This view highlights the tension between the idealized ritual and the pragmatic needs of a functioning empire. Did the moral benefits outweigh the administrative costs? As you contemplate the sudden, enforced idleness of a former high-ranking official, now sitting in a simple hut, you feel the profound implications of this quiet rule. The very pinnacle of Tang society, the men who wielded immense power, were subject to a mandatory, ritualistic surrender to grief. It was a humbling equalizer, a constant reminder that for all their worldly achievements, Their most fundamental duty lay not in the grand halls of power, but in the quiet, solemn obligation of filial piety. And this profound, empire-wide pause for grief meant that joy, entertainment, and all forms of worldly pleasure were utterly stifled, a silence that extended to every corner of daily life. The pervasive silence of the mourning period, the absence of laughter and music, the very pause of the bustling streets, these are reflections of a more profound hold at the very pinnacle of society. For those who served the emperor, the demands of grief reached into the core of their professional lives, forcing a mandatory and extended withdrawal from power. You shift your thoughts from the general stillness of the city to the sudden, stark reality faced by a high-ranking official. Imagine a man who has dedicated his entire life to climbing the bureaucratic ladder, years of arduous study, grueling imperial examinations, decades of diligent service, all leading to a position of immense influence and prestige in China. He is at the height of his power, making crucial decisions, attending imperial audiences, perhaps even shaping the destiny of the empire. Then, the news of his parents' death arrives. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. Upon the death of a parent or sometimes a grandparent, a Tang Dynasty official was legally and immediately required to resign from their post and return to their ancestral home to observe a strict mourning period of 3 years in practice, 20-7 months. This was known as Dingyu, meaning facing sorrow or grieving for parents. It was an unassailable rule, an absolute manifestation of filial piety, which dictated that one's duty to their deceased parents superseded all other obligations, including service to the state. Your personal grief, in this case, abruptly cancelled your career. The application of Dingyu was immediate and non-negotiable. There was no transition period, no handover. The official simply ceased to be an official. Their seals of office were surrendered, their robes of rank replaced by coarse mourning attire, and their daily life shifted from the intricate complexities of governance to the ascetic solitude of the mourning hut. Imagine being a CEO today, and suddenly, without warning, being legally compelled to leave your office, your projects, and your team for over 2 years, all to live in a rural shack with no internet. It's a career break with very particular strings attached. The impact of this practice on the imperial bureaucracy could be immense. Key positions, vital for the functioning of the empire, could be left vacant for years. Projects might stall, policies could go unimplemented, and administrative continuity could be severely disrupted. For a vast and complex empire like the Tang, such a mandatory hiatus for experienced personnel was a constant challenge, forcing the government to have a deep bench of qualified individuals and a robust system for rapid succession. The efficiency of the Tang bureaucracy was, surprisingly, built around its ability to absorb these periodic, ritualistic shocks. Here's a wonderfully specific and politically charged detail. While Dingyu was mandatory, there was a rare imperial dispensation known as Duo King Dorqing, literally to seize filial sentiment or to withdraw from mourning. This was an imperial command, issued by the emperor himself, compelling an official to cut short or entirely forgo their mourning period and return to service, usually in times of extreme national emergency like war or a major rebellion. However, accepting a dual king order was a double-edged sword. While it was an honor and a testament to your indispensable talent in the emperor's eyes, it could also be seen by conservative Confucian, as in the wider public, as a grave violation of filial piety. An official who accepted dual king might gain political favor but lose immense social standing, forever branded as one who put worldly ambition above sacred duty. It was a moral tightrope walk, often causing immense personal agony for the official caught between imperial command and societal expectation. This practice of Dingyu and its occasional, controversial exceptions leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Was this system ultimately a strength or a weakness of the Tang political structure? One perspective argues that Dingyu was a profound strength, contributing to the long-term stability and ethical integrity of the Tang state, by forcing officials to regularly reconnect with their families and ancestral roots. It reinforced the core Confucian values of loyalty, humility, and moral rectitude. It prevented officials from becoming too detached, too corrupt, or too powerful by periodically removing them from the political arena, breaking up long minor stern power bases. It served as a vital moral check on imperial power, ensuring that even the most ambitious official had a fundamental duty that transcended the state. However, another perspective used Ingyu as a significant weakness, a ritualistic inflexibility that could severely hamper effective governance. It led to a loss of experienced and talented officials at critical moments, disrupting continuity and potentially creating administrative crises. It could be exploited for political maneuvering, as rivals might secretly hope for a colleague's parent to die, thus removing them from contention. This view highlights the tension between the idealized ritual and the pragmatic needs of a functioning empire. Did the moral benefits outweigh the administrative costs? As you contemplate the sudden, enforced idleness of a former high-ranking official, now sitting in a simple hut, you feel the profound implications of this quiet rule. The very pinnacle of Tang society, the men who wielded immense power, were subject to a mandatory, ritualistic surrender to grief. It was a humbling equalizer, a constant reminder that, for all their worldly achievements, their most fundamental duty lay not in the grand halls of power, but in the quiet, solemn obligation of filial piety. In this profound, empire-wide pause for grief meant that joy, entertainment, and all forms of worldly pleasure were utterly stifled, a silence that extended to every corner of daily life. The quiet pause of the Tang bureaucracy, the forced retirement of high officials for years of mourning, that's a profound sacrifice for the state. But the meticulous rules of grief reached even deeper, touching the most intimate and personal aspects of family life, marriage, and by extension, the very future and social standing of the family line. Your personal life, your romantic prospects, and your family's aspirations are now firmly on hold. You are no longer just an individual. You are not in a complex web of kinship and social obligation. And now, that web is temporarily frozen by the icy grip of mourning. You might have been eagerly anticipating the marriage, perhaps your own, or that of a sibling or child. Negotiations could have been underway, dowries discussed, auspicious dates chosen, all of it, instantly, ceases. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. During a period of mourning for a close relative, particularly a parent or grandparent, marriage was strictly prohibited for the direct descendants. This was a core component of Tang mourning law, an unwavering expression of filial piety. The idea was that during a time of such profound sorrow, one's mind should be solely focused on the deceased and the solemn rites of grief. To engage in the joyous and celebratory act of marriage would be a gross disrespect to the memory of the departed, an unfilial act that would bring immense shame upon the family and potentially lead to legal penalties. Your wedding plans are officially cancelled. The duration of this prohibition directly corresponded to the Wufu mourning grades. For a parent under CUI or QICUI, the 3-year 27-month mourning period meant an absolute ban on marriage. If a couple were already betrothed, the engagement would be suspended until the mourning period was complete. If a marriage occurred during mourning, it was a severe transgression, considered a form of unfilial impiety, which could result in a lengthy prison sentence for the guilty parties, and potentially even corporal punishment for others involved. Imagine planning your dream wedding for years, only for a death in the family to put it on ice for nearly 3 years, with legal repercussions if you dared to defy the rules. But it wasn't just about actual marriages. The prohibition also extended to other life events that signified a normal progression through society. For example, for an unmarried child, it was considered highly unfilial for them to attempt to secure a civil service position or accept a new official appointment during for a parent. This mirrored the Dingyu rule for officials, reinforcing the idea that one's personal ambition must be entirely set aside in deference to grief. The family's social status, its ability to expand and forge new alliances through marriage, or to elevate its members through official service, was effectively frozen. Here's a wonderfully specific and somewhat heartbreaking detail. This rule disproportionately affected young women. In Tang China, while women held a surprising degree of property rights and influence compared to later dynasties, marriage was still their primary social trajectory. If a young woman's father died while she was of marriageable age, her prospects could be severely impaired. The 3-year waiting period might mean she missed ideal matches, or even aged out of the prime marriage window, especially if she was from a less prominent family. Her youthful beauty and fertility, prized assets in the marriage market, would be wasting away during the long period of enforced celibacy and somber attire. It was a personal sacrifice that could alter the entire course of her life. Imagine being stuck in social limbo because of a legally enforced grieving schedule. This strict prohibition on marriage during mourning leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Was this rule primarily about genuine filial piety and respect, or did it also serve as a tool of social control and lineage preservation? One perspective argues that it was indeed a profound expression of Confucian values. It ensured that the family's focus remained entirely on honoring the deceased, fostering a deep sense of collective sorrow and respect. By preventing the introduction of new members through marriage or the fragmentation of the family to a child leaving to marry or serve, it reinforced family unity and prevented the joy of new beginnings from overshadowing the solemnity of the end. It was about preserving the dignity of grief and the integrity of the lineage. However, another perspective suggests that while the moral justification was paramount, the rule also had practical social and economic functions. For wealthy families, delaying marriages meant delaying dowry payments or bridal property transfers, which could be financially advantageous. It also allowed families time to properly assess potential matches after a death, when the family's internal dynamics or social standing might have shifted. Furthermore, it controlled the movement of people and resources, keeping them within the lineage during a vulnerable time. The debate centers on the complex interplay between deep-seated moral philosophy and the very pragmatic concerns of managing family wealth, power, and social reputation. As you contemplate the stillness, not just in the government, but in the realm of personal happiness and familial progression, you feel the profound reach of these ancient laws. Your own hopes and plans, or those of your family members, are suspended, placed in a kind of temporal purgatory. The Tang Code demands that the family line, however vibrant, must symbolically pause and reflect, its future growth temporarily frozen in a gesture of profound respect for the past. The sounds of wedding celebrations are silent, the joyful promises unmade, all in deference to the quiet, meticulously prescribed rules of official mourning. The weight of tradition, it seems, is heavier than any personal dream. The quiet, stark existence in the mourning hut, the rough clothing, the bland food, these are all prescribed elements of Tang Dynasty grief. They are meant to be sincere manifestations of sorrow and filial piety. But in a society so obsessed with ritual and outward displays, a strange and subtle danger lurked: the risk of performing grief too well, or, more accurately, too poorly. Not every public display of sorrow was met with quiet admiration. Sometimes it invited scorn. You are no longer in your own solitary hut, but observing a scene in a local village, perhaps during a funeral procession or a period of intense mourning. You see mourners wailing loudly, their cries seemingly endless. Some beat their chests, or prostrate themselves dramatically on the ground. To your modern eye, this might seem like intense, unbridled grief, but to the discerning Tang observer, it could be something else entirely. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. While loud lamentation and outward expressions of grief were expected and indeed mandated, Tang society also held a keen eye for sincerity and moderation. Overly exaggerated, theatrical, or clearly insincere displays of grief were not only frowned upon but could lead to public criticism, accusations of hypocrisy, and even social censure. There was a delicate balance to strike enough grief to be filial, but not so much that it seemed false or attention-seeking. Your performance of sorrow could be critically reviewed. The Confucian ideal emphasized genuine inner feeling king expressed through appropriate ritual li. If the outer ritual seemed to contradict the inner feeling, it was seen as a moral failing, a mourner who wailed without tears, or who made a show of living austerely but secretly indulged in comforts, risked being branded as a hypocrite grn, fake benevolence, or superficial conformist. The ultimate goal was genuine, heart-filled grief, expressed according to the proper forms, but not over-minus expressed. There was such a thing as too much grief, if it felt unnatural. You say a group of villagers whispering. Their gazes are fixed on a particular mourner, a young man who is wailing with a truly astonishing volume and duration. He seems to be trying to outminus, grieve everyone else. His cries are too loud. One woman murmurs, "And look," says another, pointing discreetly. His garments, though coarse, seem a little too clean, and are those really tears, or just water from a damp cloth? The accusations are subtle, but damning. The performance, instead of garnering respect, is drawing suspicion. He is seen as performing grief rather than genuinely feeling it, and that is a grave insult to the deceased and to the ritual itself. Here's a wonderfully specific and slightly absurd detail that highlights this concern. The Tang Code, and various commentaries on it, included provisions for punishing people who feigned illness or death to avoid taxes or duties. While not directly about mourning, it speaks to a broader societal suspicion of performative deception. In the context of mourning, while actual legal punishments for insincere grief were rare and hard to prove, the social punishment could be severe. A person branded as unfilial for a false display of sorrow might find their reputation ruined, their marriage prospects diminish, and their career ambitions, if they were an official, utterly curtailed. The social pressure to be genuinely grieving, or at least to convincingly portray it, was immense. Your entire social standing was on the line. This constant scrutiny over the authenticity of mourning expressions leads to an ongoing debate among historians. How accurate were these contemporary judgments of sincerity? And what does it tell us about the nature of emotion and ritual in Tang China? One perspective argues that the Tang Chinese, immersed in a culture of ritual, developed an incredibly sophisticated understanding of subtle emotional cues and performative nuances. They could genuinely discern between deep, authentic grief even when ritualized and shallow, theatrical displays. The criticism wasn't about suppressing emotion, but about rejecting false emotion. This view emphasizes the highly developed emotional literacy of the Tang people, shaped by centuries of Confucian thought. They were experts at reading the unwritten rules of social and emotional performance. However, another perspective suggests that such intense scrutiny could also lead to hypocrisy and an inability to express grief naturally. People might have felt immense pressure to conform to an idealized standard of grief, even if their personal emotional experience was different. The fear of being judged as insincere might have led to an anxious performance of prescribed emotion, rather than a genuine outpouring. The debate questions whether the focus on sincerity created genuine virtue, or simply a more refined form or faint form of social masquerade. It's hard to know if those subtle whispers of judgment were really accurate, or just another form of social competition and envy in a tightly minus-knit community. You observe the scene, the whispers, the dramatic wailing, and you feel a strange sense of quiet apprehension. You've endured the physical discomfort of the mourning attire, the blandness of the food, the isolation of the hut. You understand the need for public displays of grief, but now you realize the final, most subtle trap: the judgment of your fellow mourners. Your sorrow must be visible, but also somehow invisible in its authenticity. It must be profound, but not theatrical. It must be ritualized, but also deeply felt. It is a tightrope walk over a chasm of public criticism. The rules for grief in Tang China, it seems, are meticulously detailed, quietly pervasive, and utterly unforgiving, even to the most dedicated performer. And the very people who enforce these subtle rules are about to step onto the stage themselves. The subtle whispers of judgment, the critical glances from your neighbors regarding your performance of grief, these are the informal enforcers of Tang Dynasty mourning. But beneath that layer of social pressure lay a far more formidable and far less forgiving mechanism, the state itself. The meticulously detailed Tang Code wasn't just a suggestion. It was law, and there were specific individuals and bodies tasked with ensuring it was followed, even in the realm of your personal sorrow. You are no longer in your hut, nor a village. You find yourself in the bustling, often intimidating, atmosphere of a local yamen, a government office. Clerks with ink-stained fingers diligently record details in massive ledgers. Minor officials, stern, faced and precise, oversee various administrative tasks. But here, within this bureaucratic machinery, a surprising amount of attention is dedicated to something as seemingly private as grief. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter. The Tang Dynasty had a highly developed, centralized bureaucracy that extended its reach into virtually every aspect of life, including the strict enforcement of mourning rituals. It wasn't just about what the emperor decreed. It was about how those decrees were put into practice, monitored, and policed. Various officials, from local magistrates to imperial censors, were responsible for upholding the intricate laws of filial piety and mourning. Your sorrow was, to them, an administrative matter. How did they do this? It was a combination of formal inspection and informal reporting. Local magistrates and village elders would have a general oversight role. They would be aware of who in their jurisdiction was in mourning, for whom, and what grade of attire and period of observance was required. They might conduct occasional spot checks, or more likely, rely on reports from within the community. Remember that omnipresent eye of Confucian society? If someone was seen violating mourning rules attending a banquet, wearing bright colors, or, heaven forbid, getting married during a prohibited period, it was likely to be reported. And reports, in Tang China, carried weight. For officials, scrutiny was even more intense. The Imperial Censorate, a powerful oversight body directly responsible to the emperor, was tasked with monitoring the conduct of all officials. If a high-ranking official was found to be neglecting their ding-yu mandatory retirement from mourning or observing it improperly, they could face severe penalties, including demotion, dismissal, or even exile. The censorate acted as the emperor's eyes and ears, ensuring that even his most trusted servants upheld the moral principles of the state. It was a rigorous audit of your grief. You watch as a minor official, in his formal robes, approaches a bustling tea house. He is not there for a leisurely cup of tea. He is there because a discreet report has reached the yamen. A merchant, whose father reportedly passed away last month, was seen wearing slightly too fine a grade of mourning cloth and was heard laughing loudly. The official's presence alone casts a chill. He is not overtly accusatory. He simply observes, nods, perhaps makes a quiet note on a small tablet. The message is clear: you are being watched. Your public performance of grief is under review. Here's a wonderfully specific and somewhat peculiar detail that underscores the legal meticulousness. The Tang Code even detailed punishments for individuals who falsely claimed to be in mourning. If you pretended a relative had died to avoid taxes, duties, or government service, or perhaps just to get out of a social obligation, you could face a beating with heavy bamboo. The severity depended on how close the deceased relative was supposed to be. Imagine going through the elaborate pretense of grief, only to be found out and punished for insufficient sorrow. The state was serious about both genuine and feigned mourning. They didn't want you to mourn less than required, but they certainly didn't want you to mourn more than was real, especially if it was for personal gain. This meticulous bureaucratic enforcement of mourning rules leads to an ongoing debate among historians. How effective was it? And what does it tell us about the nature of state power and individual autonomy in Tang China? One perspective argues that this system was remarkably effective in shaping social behavior and instilling Confucian values across a vast empire. The combination of clear legal codes, a hierarchical bureaucracy, and pervasive social pressure created a powerful apparatus for social control. It ensured a high degree of conformity to rituals, particularly among the elite and those who aspired to public service. This view sees the Tang state as uniquely powerful and successful in its ability to dictate not just law, but morality. It shows the true reach of imperial will. However, another perspective suggests that while the laws were extensive, their actual enforcement might have been more uneven and symbolic than truly pervasive. They argue that local officials might have exercised discretion, overlooked minor infractions, or been more concerned with major crimes. It was impossible for the state to truly monitor every household, every conversation. The detailed rules might have served more as an ideal to strive for, or a set of guidelines for resolving disputes, rather than a constantly enforced reality for every citizen. The debate questions the practical limits of state power in pre-modern societies, and the inevitable gap between legal ideals and lived realities. Did everyone truly fear the bureaucrats of sorrow, or was it mainly the truly unfilial or politically vulnerable who faced their wrath? As you observe the meticulous workings of the yeomen, the quiet diligence of the clerks, and the stern glances of the officials, you feel the pervasive reach of the Tang state. Your grief, your choices, your very appearance, are all subject to its meticulous, quiet scrutiny. This is not just about personal sorrow anymore. It is about proving your loyalty to an empire, about conforming to a moral code that is enforced from the imperial throne down to the smallest village. And when the time comes for the funeral itself, the public display of that conformity will reach its most solemn and most carefully orchestrated peak. The stillness now is a control, powerful thing. The solemn procession, the quiet burning of effigies, the finality of the grave mound. You've performed your part in the grand ritual of grief. You are clad in your rough hem, observing your austere diet, and living the quiet, isolated life mandated by your mourning grade. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks into months, a question begins to form in your mind: is everyone really doing this? Are these meticulously detailed rules for mourning truly followed by all across this vast and sprawling Tang Dynasty? You occasionally glimpse other mourners in the distance, their rough clothes a silent testament to their sorrow. But Chang'an is a massive city, and the empire stretches thousands of miles, encompassing millions of people from diverse backgrounds. Surely, the laws can treat everywhere, touch everyone, with the same unyielding hand. This is the central, mainstream historical debate of this chapter. How strictly were the meticulously detailed and comprehensive mourning rules of the Tang Code actually enforced and observed throughout the entire empire? Was the Tang Dynasty a society where every citizen, regardless of status or location, perfectly adhered to these stringent, quiet rules? Or was there a significant gap between the written law and the lived reality, particularly for the common people? The Tang Code, as we've seen, was a masterpiece of legal precision. Its sections on mourning were incredibly granular, specifying everything from the coarseness of your clothing to the exact number of months you had to abstain from marriage or official duty, all based on your precise familial relationship to the deceased. This suggests an intention for absolute, uniform enforcement. The imperial bureaucracy, backed by Confucian ideals of filial piety, certainly wanted everyone to follow these rules to the letter. To disobey was not just a legal infraction. It was a moral failing, a challenge to the very foundation of social order. For scholar-minus officials and those who aspire to advance in society, meticulous observance was almost certainly a necessity for their reputation and career. However, historians have long grappled with the practical realities of enforcing such detailed laws across an empire as massive and diverse as the Tang. Imagine trying to monitor the diet of every farmer's family in a remote province, or ensuring that no musician was playing a stringed instrument in a distant village. The sheer logistics would be staggering. This leads to the enduring debate. Argument for wide, spread strictness. Proponents of this viewpoint to the overwhelming Confucian ideological pressure. Filial piety was deeply ingrained in the culture through education, family teaching, and social norms. The legal penalties for unfilial behavior were severe, including beatings, exile, or even death for the most egregious offenses. Furthermore, social approbation or disapproval was a powerful motivator. To be seen as unfilial was to lose honor, reputation, and respect within your community. They argue that this combination of ideological fervor, legal coercion, and social pressure created a society where adherence to these rules was genuinely widespread, particularly for those with any social standing to lose. The meticulousness was real. Argument for practical leniency, flexibility. Critics of the absolute strictness view emphasize the practical challenges. They argue that while the ideals were strong for the elite, they were likely adapted or simplified for the vast majority of the population, particularly the rural poor. A peasant farmer simply could not afford to abandon his fields for 3 years to observe and CUI without risking starvation for his surviving family. Local customs and regional variations might have led to different interpretations or more lenient enforcement by local magistrates, who likely had to balance the law with the economic realities of their jurisdiction. They might have accepted a more symbolic observance for commoners, allowing them to continue working while still technically mourning. The debate here questions the universal reach of central authority in the pre-modern state. Was it a comprehensive web of control, or more like a powerful but porous net? Here's a wonderfully specific and somewhat pragmatic detail that highlights this tension. While Ding Yu 3-year official retirement for mourning was a strict rule, the Tang Emperor could, in times of extreme national emergency like war or rebellion, issue a duo king Dorting decree, compelling an official to return to duty prematurely. This was rare and controversial, often causing immense personal moral conflict for the official who had to choose between imperial command and filial duty. The very existence of such an exemption, however rare, suggests that even the seemingly unbending rules could bend for the sake of imperial stability and practical governance. The state, for all its idealism, sometimes needed to make exceptions for reality. You reflect on your own situation, wrapped in your of him, eating your bland food. You, an individual from a different time, are trying to conform to these ancient rules. The pressure is immense. You wonder how many of your neighbors, or people in distant villages, are feeling the same pressure, and how many are finding quiet ways to circumvent the impossible demands of the code. The strictness, it seems, was both absolute in its ideal and probably quite flexible in its application, a complex dance between moral imperative and practical necessity. The debate among historians continues, adding layers of nuance to our understanding of this fascinating period. Was Tang China truly a nation of meticulously grieving citizens, or was it a place where the grandeur of the law met the messy reality of everyday life, leading to quiet compromises? Regardless, your adherence to these rules, however painful, is a path not just to fulfilling your filial duty, but to something even more tangible in Tang society, a quiet but profound enhancement of your social reputation. The process of grief, it seems, has a surprisingly practical upside. The strict application of Tang law, the rigorous demands of your mourning grade, and the profound social pressure to conform. You've endured it all. The rough clothes chafe, the gruel is bland, and the days in the hut stretch into weeks, then months. But this arduous performance of grief is not without its rewards. Far from being a mere burden, your meticulous adherence to the mourning rituals is about to yield a tangible and highly desirable prize, a significant enhancement of your social reputation, and, if you're an official, a potential boost to your career. You are not alone in your quiet suffering. Throughout the empire, those observing their mourning periods are, wittingly or unwittingly, participating in a vast system of social capital accumulation. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this chapter: strict and public adherence to mourning rituals, particularly the most demanding grades like the 3-year mourning for parents, than CUI, was a powerful means of demonstrating one's moral character, solidifying one's reputation for filial piety, and significantly enhancing one's social standing. For scholar-officials, this impeccable performance of grief was almost a prerequisite for advancement in the highly competitive imperial bureaucracy. Your dedication to sorrow literally paved the way for future success. Imagine the whispers among your neighbors and fellow villagers. They see your rough clothing, your untrimmed hair, the quiet solitude of your mourning hut. They observe your abstinence from celebrations and your unwavering dedication to ancestral rites. These are not merely private acts, they are public declarations of virtue. In a society where moral uprightness and adherence to Confucian ideals were paramount, such a visible display of filial devotion was invaluable. It marked you as a person of deep character, someone who understood and honored the fundamental bonds of society. For an aspiring scholar, a young man hoping to enter government service, an exemplary mourning period could be more valuable than years of formal study. It was proof of his moral foundation, a tangible demonstration of his worthiness to serve the emperor and the state. After his mourning period, he might emerge with a reputation for integrity that would open doors to higher appointments or faster promotions. It was seen as an investment in one's moral resume, paid for with years of discomfort. For high-ranking officials who observed the mandatory Ding Yu 3-year retirement for mourning, their return to office was often met with increased respect and trust. Having sacrificed years of power and influence to fulfill their sacred filial duty, they were perceived as incorrigible, humble, and truly dedicated to the principles that underpinned the empire. This temporary withdrawal could, ironically, solidify their long-term power and prestige, giving them an almost saint-like aura of selflessness. Here's a wonderfully specific and somewhat strategic detail that highlights the performative aspect of this. Some mourners, particularly those eager to ensure their exemplary conduct was widely recognized, would go to lengths to make their observance visible. Historical records mention practices where mourners would sometimes ensure that important community members, local officials, or even imperial representatives were aware of, or perhaps even personally witnessed, their strict adherence. This wasn't necessarily blatant door knocking or crying on demand, but a more subtle, yet active, process of ensuring their proper conduct was publicly noted and affirmed. They might invite a local elder to witness their ritual offerings, or ensure their simple hut was visible from a well-trafficked path, subtly inviting the public eye. It was about creating a positive narrative around your grief, ensuring that your suffering was not in vain, but contributed to your public image. Imagine knowing exactly who you needed to impress with your sadness. This profound connection between meticulous mourning and social advancement leads to a deep and ongoing historical debate. Was the strict adherence to these rituals primarily a genuine expression of heartfelt piety, or was it often a calculated, strategic performance for career advancement and social climbing? One perspective argues that for many, particularly those truly steeped in Confucianism, the adherence was deeply genuine. Filial piety was a core spiritual and emotional bond, and the rituals were seen as a necessary and sincere expression of love, respect, and sorrow. The resulting enhancement of reputation was merely a natural, deserved consequence of true virtue, not the primary motivation. This view emphasizes the profound moral integrity that such a system could foster. However, another perspective suggests a more cynical, or at least pragmatic, interpretation. They argue that while genuine grief existed, the immense social and career rewards for strict observance created a powerful incentive for outward performance. Ambitious individuals, or those from families seeking to elevate their status, would meticulously adhere to every rule, knowing that their suffering would be noted and rewarded. The ritual became a means to an end, a rigorous test that one had to pass to gain access to power and prestige. This view suggests that Tang society, while valuing virtue, was also highly competitive, and even grief could become a tool for social engineering. The debate often centers on the tension between the noble ideals of Confucianism and the often messy realities of human ambition. As you contemplate the rewards of your own sustained discomfort, the subtle shift in how people view you, you feel the complex interplay of morality and practicality. Your journey through grief is not just a personal trial, it's a public statement, a carefully orchestrated performance that validates your virtue and elevates your standing in this meticulously ordered world. The Tang Code, it seems, understood that even the quietest sorrow could be a powerful currency, a way to secure a future in a society that valued tradition, order, and impeccable moral conduct above almost everything else. The stillness you have endured, the absence from life's joys, are now poised to transform into something profoundly positive. And with the slow, gradual return to life. The lessons learned from this long, quiet journey of mourning will linger, shaping your path forever. The slow, quiet entry into normal life is complete. The coarse hemp has been shed for more comfortable clothes. The bland gruel replaced by varied meals, and the social isolation has given way to renewed connections. The meticulous rules of Tang Dynasty mourning have shaped your existence for a precise period, dictating every aspect of your sorrow. Now, as you reflect on this extraordinary experience, you begin to understand how this ancient, seemingly arcane system left an indelible mark on a culture's very soul. You sit in your familiar home, perhaps sipping a cup of fragrant tea, a small luxury you'd abstained from for so long. The sounds of everyday life have returned the distant chatter from the street, the gentle hum of activity, but your perception of these sounds, and of life itself, has subtly shifted. The world feels both more vibrant in its return, and strangely more ephemeral. The enforced stillness taught you the value of motion. The absence of music taught you the depth of melody, and the profound, ritualized pause for death taught you the preciousness of life. This is the central, mainstream historical reflection of this chapter. The elaborate and legally enforced mourning rituals of the Tang Dynasty profoundly shaped the Chinese cultural understanding and expression of grief. Far from being arbitrary rules, they ingrained a particular philosophy of life, death, and social duty, influencing behavior and thought for centuries to come. These rituals emphasized a collective, rather than purely individual, experience of sorrow. Your grief was not just your own. It belonged to the family, to the lineage, and ultimately, to the cosmic order of the empire. The very act of public mourning, in its meticulously prescribed forms, reinforced social cohesion. It reminded everyone of their interdependence, of their duty and ancestrism to the living community. The quiet uniformity of grief was, paradoxically, a powerful binder of society. It also cultivated a unique relationship with time. The lengthy mourning periods forced individuals to slow down, to withdraw from the relentless pace of daily life, and to dedicate extended periods to reflection. This wasn't just about showing respect for the dead. It was about internalizing profound lessons about impermanence, duty, and the cyclical nature of existence. Life was divided into periods of joyous engagement and solemn withdrawal, each with its own profound meaning. Here's a wonderfully specific and lingering lesson from this system, the subtle art of controlled grief. As we saw, wild, unrestrained displays were often viewed with suspicion. The Tang system taught a dignified, measured expression of sorrow deeply felt, yet publicly composed. This emphasis on restraint, on channeling intense emotion into elegant ritual, became a hallmark of refined conduct. It was a unique form of emotional literacy, where true sincerity was demonstrated not by how loudly you cried, but by how meticulously you fulfilled your duties, by how quietly you endured your discomfort, and by how perfectly you managed your inner turmoil within the prescribed forms. Imagine the deep emotional control this would instill in a culture. This profound impact of mourning rituals leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Did these rules primarily lead to genuine emotional processing and spiritual growth? Or did they foster a culture of emotional suppression and performative piety? One perspective argues that the rituals provided a necessary psychological and social framework for coping with loss. They offered a clear roadmap for grief, preventing individuals from being overwhelmed by chaotic emotion. The physical hardships and social restrictions were seen as transformative, forging stronger character and deeper bonds. The very act of performing filial piety, even under duress, was believed to cultivate genuine virtue and ultimately to a more profound and meaningful experience of grief. It offered a way to make sense of the senseless. However, another perspective suggests that the extreme formality and legal enforcement of these rules could lead to a disconnect between outward behavior and inner feeling. Individuals might have felt immense pressure to conform, to act grieving, even if their personal emotional state was more complex. This could result in a society where emotional suppression was common, and where genuine, spontaneous expressions of sorrow or joy were discouraged. The debate questions whether such strictures truly fostered deeper emotions or merely created a system of elaborate social masquerade. It's hard to know if the quiet dignity was truly calm, or simply a rigid suppression enforced by fear of societal judgment. You carry the indelible mark of your own mourning experience. The scratchy hemp is gone, but the memory of its discomfort lingers. The bland gruel is a distant memory, but the understanding of austerity remains. You have lived through a system where personal grief was a public duty, where sorrow was meticulously legislated, and where quiet adherence to rules elevated your social standing. The Tang Dynasty, through its seemingly silly and obsessive rules for mourning, shaped a culture that understood loss not just as an ending, but as a profound, transformative, and meticulously ritualized journey. Then now, as the quiet of your room deepens, and the last remnants of the day's sound soften into the night, the memory of that ancient journey begins to fade, becoming less a lived experience and more a gentle hum in the back of your mind. The grandeur of Chang'an, the stern gaze of officials, the meticulous charts of mourning grades, the quiet solitude of the grave hut, they all blend into a distant, comforting murmur. Your mind, no longer grappling with ancient laws or social strictures, begins to slow, gently unwinding like a scroll. The distinctions between past and present, between waking and dreaming, become wonderfully indistinct. You are drifting now, carried on a calm, soft current, into the quiet, boundless ocean of sleep. The history has been told, the lessons have been learned, and now, it is time for rest. The end of the article. Good night.